Hey everybody, welcome to episode 5 and the second part of my problems with Akiyas. And in this one I'm going to get into a little bit more about the problems that can happen with the house itself or with the land. I am Paul Durant and these are my adventures in real estate. I want to get right into it this week with some problems that could actually be connected to the house itself that you want to purchase. Now, the thing about houses in Japan, especially Akiyas, is a lot of them exist in the countryside. Now, of course, there are plenty that are in the cities as well. And so the city houses maybe are going to be a lot more ready to go, but the countryside houses are going to be a little bit more complex, getting started, getting things going, etc. But even the city houses, a lot of times, you're going to look through photos of the houses and you're going to see old toilets, you're going to see old kitchens. Basically, I think I mentioned in the very first episode, it's almost a given that the water areas of the house are going to have to be redone. Put modern toilets in, put modern bathtubs in, put modern kitchens in. All of this stuff is almost a guarantee. However, there are some exceptions and there are some houses that have already been renovated in that regard. So that's fantastic, but you're going to find those are going to be probably a little bit higher price unless there's another problem associated with that house. I mentioned in the last episode, termites. Look very, very closely. In Japan, most houses, especially older houses, are wood frame houses. That's kind of on purpose because the Japanese have a lot of wood. They haven't traditionally had a lot of other resources to build houses with, and this is earthquake country. Don't forget that. That's very important as you think about your decision to buy in Japan, because a wood house moves around a lot, and that means that it can withstand earthquakes pretty well. However, if the basic structure, if the beams of the house have moved off kilter, well, that could be a serious problem that you'll want to look into, especially if you're looking at old Kominka style houses, because a lot of those beams are placed on rocks, and that was how they built foundations 150 years ago. So you're going to want to get in there. You're going to want to look at the foundation. It's very common for foundation problems in those old Kominkas. Either the foundation has slipped off the rocks, I'm going to have to pick it up and put it back down. That is possible, but it is expensive. And the other possibility is that you've got termites down there and you might have to deal with that, or you might not be able to deal with it. Maybe the termites have actually really done substantial and irreparable damage to those beams. However, if you're looking at a newer house, you probably are looking at more of a concrete structure, and even some of the older Kominkas have been replaced on the concrete structures as well. So, that might work out a little bit better. Another thing to be aware of with the structure itself is that after about 1988, there were some pretty strict anti-earthquake reinforcements, etc., that were done to houses. And so if you buy a house before 1988, and this also goes with apartments, probably that house is a lot less technologically or scientifically prepared for the earthquake. Naturally, the builders used a lot of joinery and that sort of thing, which goes up against earthquakes pretty well, but that's very traditional. And the modern science of earthquaking a house wasn't really handled until after 1988. So you want to make sure that if that's a major concern for you, that you're looking for houses that are built after 1988 and they're going to have really, really strong foundation. So you want to look for that. So the other thing to be worried about is the boundaries of the land, because a lot of times the families that own these houses have owned them for generations. Of course, the land has been surveyed here and there. When places are sold, new surveys are made. So that does happen. But if the land has been in family for generations, there's a very good chance that those boundaries, the actual boundaries of the land, are not registered and have not been recently surveyed. Sure, it's on record that that family owns that land or that person owns the land, but exactly what it is that they own is not clearly done. And so this is a responsibility of actually the seller. The seller is required to have a land surveyed before they sell the land, but a lot of times they don't. I mentioned last episode about how sometimes the houses that you buy are as is, and a lot of times the land is also as is, and that means you have to register it. A sale can't go through unless somebody registers the land, and there's a very good chance that the owner of the land is just going to wash their hands of it. Why? Because it costs some money. Registering the land could cost 2 million yen. That's high, but it could be 1 million yen. So it's not cheap. It's going to add a substantial amount of money onto the house. So that's something that at least needs to be negotiated. And before you say yes to it, you certainly want to make sure that you know exactly what it is you own. And the reason for that also can be that through the years, maybe a little bit of your house is built on somebody else's land. That could be a problem. Maybe somebody's built their house on your land a little bit. Obviously, that's a problem. So that registering that and then negotiating the conditions before everything is bought and sold is going to be really important, because if you buy the land and then you find out, well, some of your house is actually on somebody else's land and they tell you to get it off, then you have to get it off. So this is going to be a really, really big problem. Another problem related to the land itself is the access to the land. So a lot of times the land is kind of through the years, maybe the road positions have changed, or maybe somebody had a big piece of land and they kept the front that they sold the back or something like that. And through the years, the access to that land has been challenged or even disappeared. Nowadays, modern law requires that a piece of land has public access. And if they don't have public access, you can still sell the land, but you can't do anything with the land. So if there's a house on the land, you can live in it. You could renovate that house. You can't build a new house because there's no access to the land. So this is obviously a big problem, because if you want to buy a beautiful piece of land, but it has no access, and you want to put a house on it, you can't. Or maybe you want to tear down the current house and put a new house, you can't. So this is really, really serious. And this isn't about getting to the neighbors and seeing if you can borrow their access. It is law that you can't register to build a house on that land. So even if the neighbors say yes, the government will say no. And obviously you can't build a house without government approval. So that's going to be a very serious problem. So you need to make sure that somehow you have public access to your land. Otherwise, it's going to be a big problem. And, you know, if it does come to, you love the house, you think it's wonderful, but someday you do have to tear it down, getting that house out of there is going to be a problem too. So a lot of times also in the cities, the land area is very, very small. It's very, very tight. It's very constricted. And that could be a huge problem. Access to the land could be huge. Also, just being able to build on that piece of land or rebuild on that piece of land could be a big issue. A lot of the houses are built right next to each other in the cities. In fact, that's illegal. And so it wasn't illegal maybe 50 years ago or even 30 years ago or certainly 100 years ago, but it's illegal now. So that means that if you tear that house out and you try to build a new house in there, the house is going to be substantially smaller to make sure that you have at least that fire space in between the two houses. And so that's also something you need to be aware of, especially if you're buying in the cities and especially if you're buying a very, very small piece of land. Also related to that, you might think, well, I'll just add another story. So instead of a 2-story house, I'll make a 3-story house. Well, the difference between a 2-story and a 3-story house is pretty substantial. The type of frame that you can put on your house, much more complex with a 3-story house. The zoning different, the permits are different. It's substantially different, and it's substantially more expensive to put that third level on the house. So remember that a 2-story house is going to probably be your max, generally speaking, to keep prices down. So that's more a city problem, but it can certainly come up in the countryside as well. So speaking of the countryside again, let's think about the facilities. So public sewers, sure, very common in the cities naturally, but on the countryside, very unlikely. And so you're going to need to make sure that you know what's being done with the sewage of the house. Could be a septic tank, could be an old septic tank. You'd want to make sure that septic tank is in decent shape before you buy, or what kind of shape it's in, because you may have to replace that. Or maybe it's not even a septic tank. Maybe it's a sump pump type of situation, and that's going to definitely need some modernization. You're not going to be able to use that, and probably have to put a septic tank in. Maybe there's public sewer nearby since the place was built, but a lot of times in the countryside there isn't that. And so related to that is the gas. If you want to have natural gas in your house, is it going to be city gas, or are you going to have propane delivered to your house? In the countryside, a lot of times propane is delivered. Even in smaller towns, or even somewhat larger towns, you're going to find that you're going to have that propane delivered. So maybe you want to go all electric, and that's fine. But if you're looking for gas heat, or you're looking for gas for your stove, or your clothes dryer, or whatever it is, then you're certainly going to want to be aware of what that cost for the gas is going to be. City gas, generally speaking, a lot cheaper than the propane gas that they deliver. Another possibility is kerosene. A lot of the older houses have kerosene, kerosene water heaters, kerosene heaters. Nowadays, you can get the forced fan heaters that takes that kerosene exhaust out of the house, which is important. But in the old houses, a lot of times the kerosene heaters were unvented, and so how is that house being heated is going to be really important, and how much you need heat, how cold does it get where you're going, but also how much insulation is built into the house. Probably not very much. And so if you're looking at a cold area, especially, that's going to probably be something that will be a concern. So another thing just to be aware of is neighborhood associations. Knowing who you are supposed to talk to, who you're supposed to connect with, etc. It's not so much association, although vacation homes a lot of times will have an actual HOA that you'll have to pay some kind of dues for, and maybe you'll have to pay for some onsen water rights. I mentioned that in the last a couple of episodes ago as well. That may be desirable for you. That may not be. I'll do another episode about beso or vacation homes in the future. But in addition to the HOA, you might have just a neighborhood group that you need to be a part of. What does that mean? That means that you'll join the group. There'll probably be some kind of dues that will be used to sort of take care of the local area. Might be even used to have a festival or a party in the neighborhood. Also, there'll be cleanups expected that you'll take part in. You might have to be involved in certain activities that are sponsored by the neighborhood, or things that sort of are used for neighborhood use. And so finding out if there's a responsibility like that, who do you talk to, how much is it going to cost you, what are the expectations, are going to certainly be valuable as you go into the town. Of course, you can choose not to get involved in those groups, but if you do, you are probably going to have a negative impact on your community. And if you're looking at a really small town, that could really hurt your relationship with the community as a whole in the long term. It could make it really difficult to live there. So you want to make sure that you know kind of what you're getting into as much as you can. A lot of times the seller-buyer interview may be a place to find out some of those details about the neighborhood, although often sellers don't know either because they don't live in the neighborhood. And so it might be a trip to City Hall or even talking to the neighbors to find out what the expectations are for you in the area. So those are a few problems that I wanted to get into in this episode. We'll get into some of the problems with vacation homes and some of the benefits of vacation homes maybe in the next couple of episodes. And in the next episode, I really want to talk about why you might want to own a home in Japan.